24-hour interactive production of a new song sponsored by Coke, to the now infamous Twitter-fed improvisations of Isaiah Mustafa for Old Spice. In just over a year, Iain Tait has moved Wieden Kennedy from an also-ran in the digital advertising world to its upper ranks. His inspirations lie in everything from early computer games to psychology, but for all the technological savvy and social prowess, most of his ideas begin alone with two simple tools, notebook and pen. Please join me in welcoming Iain Tait. So we know this campaign, the Old Spice Twitter campaign, was popular. I mean, the brand's Twitter followers went from 3,000 to 46,000 in just a few hours. But what would you describe as the most meaningful metrics to measure the success of this buy?
I think it was probably just how quickly it went from something that was kind of passive online to something that was very active. So, you know, I'm slightly nervous about this whole thing because I had absolutely nothing to do with inventing this amazing character or the brilliant writing that kind of went on. I think my involvement was kind of coming in after he'd already had this very successful, the original ad was on YouTube, and it was, you know, they were looking for what they could do online. And I said, well, you know, this guy is, you know, he's the kind of guy that it's okay for guys to like. It's okay for guys to have their girlfriends like him. We kind of feel threatened by him, but it's kind of okay. And he speaks directly to camera, which is really rare apart from anything other than infomercials. So it's like, there's a guy that speaks directly to camera that people want to talk to. Why don't you just get him replying to people on the internet? And, you know, the great people who came up with it and the great writers went, hey, that'd be cool. And, you know, that was it. And then the idea kind of just generated and moved on from there. So I think the big thing was we went from being something that was entirely one way to something that was very, very two-way, which is, you know, a principle that I hold massively dear.
The quest in interactive is so much about, you know, visits, it's about, you know, tweets, it's about comments and this kind of thing. What do you think are the greatest misunderstandings about interactive media in general and its use in advertising in particular?
I think quite often, you know, for a long time, the whole interactive industry was driven by numbers because it's so countable and it's so easy to count and see exactly what's happening, who's watching what, who's sharing what. I think the things that nobody is really keeping track of is how it emotionally moves people and what they actually feel at the end of it. And you know, quite often the whole advertising industry is still built around these metrics of, you know, how many eyeballs have the potential to see something. And it's really hard as an industry to go, all right, well, if you put an ad on in the middle of, you know, American Idol, there's this many people watching the show, therefore you're going to hit this many people, they're going to pay attention to the thing you're seeing. And there's a whole industry been built around making people feel like that's true. And you start off and you kind of go, oh, we've got, you know, a similar number of people watching this clip on YouTube. And to me, those two things are radically different. Like, one is almost you've been forced to look at this thing and we don't even know if you're in the same room, but that's still counted as the same value as someone actively deciding, you know, whether it's from a recommendation from a friend or however they got there, to actively clicking play on something on YouTube. And you can see how far someone goes through that clip, whether they get to the end, and you can obviously see, you know, what people's emotions are around those things. And so I think, you know, we need to evolve to kind of have a more holistic view. And then kind of when you talk about the kind of the longer term sort of things that video games give us, I think there's something really important in the length of experience and the kind of engagement that people get. So if you look at culture generally, you know, you look at the length of time that kids spend engaged with bits of film, you know, YouTube is shrinking the attention span down to, I saw something the other day that said 40 seconds is the average time people spend watching bits of content on YouTube. Whereas you look at the length of time people engage in video games, and you can get these incredibly long-form pieces of narrative that, you know, 40 hours plus, you know, for a video game. And so I think there's something just in terms of that depth of engagement and that level of attention that you can create if you really understand how to do those things. And then there's one more thing. You know, we've been looking into some things recently, and one of my colleagues, Rennie, who I don't even know if these stats that he called out are true, but he's a smart guy, so I'm assuming they're kind of half true. We were looking at it the other day, and we found this research that said that if you spend 90 seconds playing a video game where you play a handsome and heroic character, you feel more confident for an entire day. This is a thing that actually happens to kids. And then also, if you regularly play pro-social games, so games where it's about collaboration and helping other people out, you actually become 3 to 4 times more likely to help out a stranger in real life. And you know, I think some of these things, which are actually to do with deeper levels of interaction, you can get into people's heads much more deeply. And I think adding in things like the Connect, where you know, so much of the brain is basically dealing with coping with how our body works, that if you feed it in the other way around and you actually make experiences about how you move your body, I think how that affects how you think about things can be incredibly powerful. So I think there's so much that you can do with sort of building experiences that, you know, kind of teach people to be smarter, more human, problem-solving people. And it's kind of anti to most people's perception of video games, which is that they're all violent things that teach kids to be lazy and bad.
Well, certainly the one, you know, the perception one would get watching the commercials for them on TV. You know, it's predominantly, you know, sort of warriors and you know, going after it. So I mean, it seems like there's also a dystopic end of this.
Sure.
I mean, I think of in the 60s there was this incredible film. I'm not going to remember the name of it, in which they did role reversals between blue-eyed kids and brown-eyed kids, and so for a period of time, you know, the blue-eyed kids would get all the props, right? And then you know, you'd go out at recess, and the blue-eyed kids were, you know, feeling superior, and the brown-eyed kids were, you know, not. And then they reversed it, and within, I mean, it's just little kids. Within minutes, they completely switched their roles, and it was basically about racism. But you know, I mean, do we have any metrics in terms of what percentage of kids are playing more video games? I mean, you know, nice video games as opposed to bad ones, or violent ones, I should say.
I honestly don't know. I haven't looked into that enough. I think it's something that we all need to be mindful of as parents and people who can influence those things. You know, I saw another, just a lot of kind of seemingly kind of benign games, I think, actually are really good. So even like sporting games can teach people really good things. And I did see an experiment recently where they'd taken kids playing kind of the Call of Duty, or I don't know, call that out because it may not have been that one, but a kind of a war game versus playing a soccer game. And they went to an interview with a psychologist afterwards, and halfway through the interview, the pen pot gets knocked off the desk, and then they had a control group as well. And the kids who were playing the soccer game were way more likely to help the person pick up their pens off the floor than the control, and then the kids playing the bad game were actually more likely to just sit there and not help out at all. So you know, there's definitely both ends of the spectrum, and we just need to be mindful that these things are incredibly powerful.
So, you went through digital detox and then blogged about it. What did you learn from that, and are there sort of lessons that you think other people might absorb from that experience?
I hand-wrote my blog through the period of being offline. Well, there you go.
There it is.
So, yeah, I mean, definitely the things here were really interesting. And I think this is what kind of reawakened my sense of not trying to sit at the computer all the time at work. That there were 3 major things. One was sleeping was different. So I felt much more tired naturally when I wasn't using. So sorry, I should probably rewind a little bit. Mental Detox Week was a whole week when I agreed to give up using screens of any description. So it was no mobile phones, no computers, no watching television. So I kind of went back to pen and paper and reading books, and by 9:30 I was feeling really tired, so I went to bed, and that was really good. And you know, I found that I was dreaming completely differently, so there was some kind of deep changes that just happened as a result of not having kind of flickering pixels in front of your eyes all the time. And then just in terms of kind of noting things down, you know, maybe I'm a reasonable kind of typist, but I can type quicker than I can think. So I'm kind of writing, and it's like, you know, the words kind of run away from my brain, whereas writing things down with a pen on a piece of paper, it's kind of slow and a little bit kind of clumsy and arduous. And actually, it seemed, and it might just be a kind of an illusion of novelty, but the speed that I was writing was in harmony with my brain, so things were like, oh, okay. And, you know, I'd be thinking about new things before I'd started writing the next one, and it was really nice to kind of feel that really worked. What else? I think just that sense